They told me the light over the marsh was just headlights refracted off a distant highway. But the highway was built 10 years after I first saw it, and the light knew my name. On the night the past finally clawed through 45 winters to put a man in handcuffs, the light returned to the waterline behind my father's old boathouse in St. Clair County, pulsing slow as a heartbeat, bright as a memory refusing to die. The arrest should have closed a chapter. Instead, it opened a door. The light blinked 3 times, and the river answered with a sound like breath catching in a throat, the same way it did the first time a girl went missing in November 1980. When I was 12 and thought ghosts were stories people told to make the woods behave. I was 57 the morning I stepped into the sheriff's office to watch history get written in ballpoint ink on a chain of custody form, the kind that says we finally found him, the one who hurt her, the one who breathed our air and waved at our parades and bought bait where we bought bait, the one who pretended to age with us, harmless as a porch light at dusk. Sheriff Matson gave me the kind of nod that says we're not boys anymore, and nobody gets to be just a witness in a town this small. Everyone is either haunted or doing the haunting. He had the file out already thin as old ice, thick as a secret 45 years of notes, dead ends, tire casts, and one clean answer that arrived like a late winter thaw. A DNA hit, the kind that changes how you remember your neighbors. I had a reason to be there, beyond morbid curiosity. I was the one who found the hairbreadth clue tucked in the bramble behind our boathouse. The thing that linked back to a truck long ago stripped for parts, to a man who always left church before the final hymn, to a stain the river refused to carry away. Call it stubbornness, or call it the light. Either way, I'd been listening to the marsh for the better part of 4 decades, and lately it had been whispering the same name. When they brought him in hollowed cheeks, eyes that wouldn't settle someone in the lobby whispered, "No way," and someone else whispered, "Finally," and the air between those 2 words felt like the space between thunder and the count you keep before lightning hits your yard. He was the kind of man you wave to with 2 fingers off the steering wheel, the kind you nod at in the hardware store, standing in the aisle with lengths of rope and excuses. They put him in interview 2, a room with a table like a confession booth and a camera that never blinks. I didn't go in. The sheriff didn't ask me to. Instead, I stood in the hall and felt the building settle, as if justice weighs something you can measure in floorboards. The coffee tasted like burnt pine and duty. Somewhere down the corridor, the copier breathed out warm paper and cold facts. It was the second time in my life the town felt like it was holding its breath. The first time was 1980. I was 12, riding my bike along the river with a transistor radio tuned to a game I wasn't really listening to, when the patrol cars screamed past and the siren sound tore the afternoon open. They found her the next day in the state game area, the way hunters sometimes find what nobody should ever have to name out loud. I remember my father turning the TV off and sitting at the kitchen table with his fists around a mug like he was trying to warm up a prayer. Back then, the light started to show itself out across the marsh, where cattails shiver even when the wind doesn't announce itself. First time I saw it, I told my mother it was a fisherman's lantern. She said no fisherman rows at midnight in November, unless he's running from something he can't outpace on land. The light trembled, swelled, and broke apart into smaller pieces, like a chorus struggling to agree on a melody. Then it settled into one round globe and held steady, as if it had found a face to look at. My face. Years later, some college kids stood on the overlook and declared the whole thing a trick of perspective automobile headlights skipping across layers of cool air. A grate in the road fooling your brain, a parlor trick built by atmosphere and distance. They might not be wrong for their light. Maybe they puzzled out the one north of Watersmeet. But ours began before a new highway cut through the fields, and it behaved like it had a memory. The marsh has a way of keeping books different from men. A day of the arrest, the sheriff said a name, and the station felt smaller. Half the older deputies had shaken that hand at pancake breakfasts. One of them had shared a deer blind. Another had fixed his alternator on a Sunday. The last person you expect is only the last because you never put them on your first list. That's how towns protect themselves from looking in the mirror too long. News crews were already idling at the curb by evening, their satellite dishes blooming like iron flowers, talking in quiet voices about closure, about advances in forensic science, about how the past seems to wait for technology to grow teeth. If you listened carefully, you could hear the word miracle tucked inside methodology, like a seed hidden in a syllable. I didn't stay for the press conference. The marsh light had been pacing in my periphery all day, tugging at me like a dog who knows what's buried by the fence. I drove out of town on County Line and turned down the 2-track that leads to the boathouse my father built with a hammer that still hangs above my workbench. The sun was a blood orange dragged low. The air smelled like leaf rot and iron. The boathouse door stuck like always, the swollen wood protesting the change of seasons. Inside, spiderwebs drew diagrams of patient work. I pulled the cord on the single bare bulb and felt the old place curl around me, all varnish and river breath. Out the back window, the marsh light waited, a single white coin laid on a green-black table. 3 pulses, like a knock you answer with your heart. I stepped onto the dock. The boards moaned in that way that always makes me think of my father clearing his throat before saying something difficult. I said the arrested man's name out loud, and the light shivered and leaned toward me like a dog that's heard the can opener. I said the girl's name full and careful, because you ought to handle the dead like you handle a flag, and the light pulled back as if to make room for her. The river shifted, and I saw it, a shape in the water that wasn't current. It rose just enough to show an edge, a geometry out of place, and then sank like a thought you mean to keep. I know the tricks water plays, how tannins tattoo illusions, how moonlight counterfeits movement. But the shape had direction, a point to it like a finger. It indicated the stand of willow at the far bank, the one with a root ball that looks like a mouth. That's where I found it, a week before the arrest. A strip of cloth mummified into the soil, pale as old parchment, snagged under a root like the river had been trying to hand it to me for years, and I hadn't learned the language to accept. Stitched into the hem handmade, a mother's habit were 2 initials I knew from a photograph in the file. A photograph I had no business seeing, but did anyway, because grief makes deputies into docents, and some doors open for the stubborn. I had turned that fabric in under chain of custody, watched the lab techs unfurl their science like sails, and held my breath while they spoke their quiet spells over it. Weeks of silence followed, then a call, a match, and now a man in cuffs, breathing the same county air. The river likes to keep, but it also likes to return. Night slid down with the appetite of November, and the light did a new thing. It stepped closer. Not literally distance in the marsh is a liar, but the sensation of it moved. A pressure against my chest, the way you know someone stands behind you, even if they haven't touched your shoulder yet. The dock was steady. My hands weren't. You can stop now, I said, to the light or the water or the place in me that had been knotted since I was 12. The marsh answered with a ripple that traveled in a straight line no wind could draw. It kissed the dock post and rang it like a tuning fork, a dull, clean note. I waited for whatever came next to be reasonable. It wasn't. The cattails leaned without breeze. The willows bent as if someone taller than me had just brushed past. And on the far bank, under the root ball mouth, a second light woke. Smaller, softer. It didn't pulse. It breathed. I should have been afraid. Instead, a calm rolled over me like a slow tide, the strange old peace of finally hearing the name you've been called all your life, but never turned your head to. Behind me, in the boathouse, something knocked twice. Wood on wood, polite but insistent. The hammer over the bench jostled, then settled. My father's old level rolled a half-inch and stopped against a nail. The room gathered itself and waited. I turned and saw my own reflection in the window, older and more honest than I'd felt an hour before. A third knock. "All right," I said. "I'm listening." The marsh gave me a story in fragments, in images that arrived like postcards from a place you can't get to by road. A pair of boot prints that don't match the boots you remember. A torn bumper half hidden in reed, teeth marks of rust on steel. A dispatch log with a time stamp that moves when you look twice. A face in a pickup's back window, reflection layered over reflection, so that any name could be the right one. I saw the girl as she was, not the tragedy, not the caption under a photo, but the person who rolled her eyes when her sister borrowed her sweater, who cut her bangs too short one spring and wore a hat for a week, who loved the river when it was green and when it was brown. People say the dead want justice. Maybe. Sometimes they just want to be made whole in the telling, the way you glue a favorite cup back together, even if you'll never drink from it again. A siren wailed back in town, the late news slot opening like a curtain. The light by the willow dimmed, and the main light steadied. It felt like the end of a chapter, but I knew better. Arrests are punctuation marks, not endings. We had a suspect in cuffs. We had the thing that tied him to the marsh. But the marsh kept one more trick, one wide enough to swallow sleep. On my way back to the boathouse door, the dock groaned again. I paused and told myself wood moves. It remembers summer. Then I saw them, footprints on the planks, wet and fresh, leading toward the door where I stood, each print the size of a woman's shoe, the tread soft, like soles that never learned to harden. They stopped at my toes, turned sideways, as if whoever made them wanted to stand next to me and look out over the water, and then they were gone, the boards drying faster than my sense. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because some silences need a human sound to make them behave. "Okay," I said, and for a second I heard my father in my mouth. "Okay." I lifted the latch, stepped inside, and pulled the cord on the bulb. It popped and died, plunging the room into a dark that didn't feel empty. The hammer knocked once against the pegboard, a courteous little tap, the kind a friend makes before he lets himself in. When I turned back, the marsh lights were gone. My eyes adjusted and found their own stars. And on the workbench, on a clean square of newspaper I hadn't left there, lay a single object. A tiny, clear button, the kind sewn onto a blouse in the late 70s, smooth as a worry stone, cold as a kept promise. It was damp, and it smelled faintly of the river. I knew then the arrest wasn't the thing. It was the key to the real door. Something had been taken 45 years ago that wasn't a life, but touched everything that life would have brushed. Against a sister's wedding dress, a child's middle name, a porch where someone would have watched thunderheads grow. Some piece of it had made its way back through cattail and silt, through pins and evidence bags, through the rumor of science and the fact of it, to sit in my palm and ask a question. What do you do with a question made of plastic and time? You take it to the only place where answers are patient. You go back to the marsh. You wait for the light. You listen to the river practice the sound of a girl's name until it gets it right. And you don't go alone. Not because you're scared, not exactly, but because being witnessed is how truth learns to stand up straight. Tomorrow, I'll bring someone who can write a map made of water and rumor, a historian who treats folklore like evidence, who knows that unexplained doesn't mean untrue. Tomorrow, we'll measure distances that lie and take notes that don't, and we'll let the marsh teach us where memory goes when it can't find a body. Tonight, I'll sit with the button on my palm and the hammer at my elbow and wait for the house to stop remembering how to be afraid. Outside, a fog came in low, the kind that makes even familiar yards feel like ships adrift. Across the water, a loon called once and then thought better of it. The river's skin tightened against the cold. Somewhere, In the cinder block walls of Interview 2, a man learned how small a chair can make you feel. And here, in the old boathouse, a story both older and newer than 1980 exhaled and settled down in the dust, making room for what comes next. By morning, the button had dried to a dull clarity, like a raindrop that forgot how to melt. It sat on my kitchen table beside a yellow legal pad and a mug that knew too much coffee. The news was looping the same 3 shots. The cruiser door shutting, the suspect's chin refusing to lift, and a deputy's hand on his shoulder like the past could be steadied by touch. They said closure because the cameras like ending words, but endings are rare birds here. Mostly we get migrations. I called Nora Whitcomb, the local historian with a file cabinet for a brain and a tolerance for the strange that had never turned into gullibility. Nora gives folklore the same respect she gives land deeds. Both record where people believed their lives belonged. Her voice came through crisp, like river air in February. "You're bringing me out there today," she said, and it wasn't a question. "Bring boots." And something that's seen a ghost and decided not to blink. We met at the end of the 2-track, sunlight standing thin on the cattails. Nora wore a wool cap and the expression of someone who makes bargains with the unknown, but always reads the fine print. I handed her the button. She turned it over under the light, held it to her ear, as if it might have a seashell's patience. "Late 70s blouse button. Common, but not cheap," she said. "These caught light on dance floors and under gymnasium chandeliers. This one kept a promise long enough to be found." We followed the dock toward the boathouse, our boots writing today's date into old wood. Nora paused to look out over the marsh. "You said it breathed," she murmured. Lights that breathe have a story. Summer gases playing the old Trichidnus fatus, foolish fire. Some are owls, some are road grade and wishful thinking. But some. She let the rest hang there, like a porch swing, moving after whoever sat on it has gone inside. I told her again what it had done, the 3-pulse knock. The second light by the willow, the footprints that ended where my shoes began. Nora nodded without flinching. "People want the uncanny to be either prank or proof," she said. "It's almost never either. It's a pressure event. Something you can't hold, but you can feel pushing." She inclined her head toward the far bank. "Show me the mouth of the willow." We worked the bank methodically, that sweet middle ground between ritual and police work. Nora used a collapsible probe, easing it into soil the color of tea that's been forgotten on a windowsill. "Roots knit," she said. They also hoard. The willow's root ball had caught years of small testimony, bottle cap hieroglyphs, a lure with its feather gone gray, a quarter whose year mattered to someone and then didn't. She dusted with a soft brush and laughed once. Happily, when the earth gave us a thread of something not earth. "Textile," she announced, and there it was. A second strip narrower than the first, a whisper of fabric that had learned how to be patient. The weave matched the square plainness of late-century blouses. The stitch was careful, not factory. "Somebody tried to mend a life," Nora said, and the river refused to let mending be the last word. We bagged it with the kind of reverence people reserve for relics or wedding cake slices, saved in freezers and never eaten. A sound moved across the marsh, then the old soft cough of water, adjusting to a new idea. Nora stilled. The light wasn't visible. It was implied, a pressure under the skin of the day, that sensation you get before a storm when the dog gets nervous and you pretend you don't. "It isn't a lighthouse," Nora whispered, "but it serves the same function. It points. Question is, to what? Fresh guilt? Old mercy?" Back in town, the courthouse steps had sprouted microphones like a sudden crop. The DA used the words forensic genealogy and persistence, and everyone nodded like they were hearing a psalm they'd learned as children, but never expected to believe again. The mugshots did their flat work on the evening news. A timeline crawled along the bottom of the screen, a parade of dates that tried to pass for a story. I stood in my living room, the button worn from my pocket, and tried to imagine the first time he realized he might not get away with it anymore. That night we went back, Nora and I, with 2 headlamps and rules. No calling out to what you don't want answering. No first names unless you mean them as gifts. No running unless fire or water demands it. The marsh had already drawn its curtains. Crickets tuned up. A loon drew a white line of sound and then erased it. We took our places on the dock as if we were pew-sitters and the sermon might be participatory. The light came like a breath held too long and then released. Not sudden, not dramatic. A patient insistence. Here I am, if you can stand to know it. It found its place above the water and steadied there. Nora lifted her palm very slightly, as if greeting a shy neighbor. The light answered with 1 pulse. Then 2. Then the old 3, like the knocks in the boathouse. That's a code, Nora said. Or a habit pretending to be a code. She murmured a story under her breath, one of those local tales about lantern men and wandering warnings. About brakemen and mail carriers and dancers you only see when the fog has declared a truce. The telling was low and even, like a lullaby, you invent because the one you remember hurts too much. The light didn't dim under the story. It thickened, as if meaning were something you could pour. Across the way, at the willow's mouth, a lesser radiance bloomed, not as white, more like the color of old paper. It did not move toward us. It did not retreat. It occupied. Nora squeezed my elbow, a quick human punctuation. Dual lights, she said. A lead and a witness. Her breath steamed in the November. Tell it what changed today. I spoke the arrested man's name, and the light didn't flinch. I spoke the girl's name. Careful again, and the lesser lights swelled, as if agreeing that names are not for the dark to hold forever. We found another piece, I said. The river kept it for you. The main light narrowed to a point and wrote a line across the surface of the water, a bright suture stitching from our dock to the far reeds. Nora's headlamp caught something then motion at the very edge of Seeable. At first I thought fish. Then I thought debris. But it held a shape against the current. Geometry again, not drift. There, she whispered, and we both leaned in that careful way that means you're ready to back away fast if the world makes a new rule. The thing nudged the dock and paused like a hand offering the past back to the present. A license plate, eaten half through by rust, the numbers wounded, but legible if you squinted kindness at them. The county prefix was right for 1980. The year sticker was stubbornly the wrong color, a detail no one but a bored teenager at a Secretary of State counter would have noticed. Nora looked at me with the kind of surprise that holds equal parts awe and dread. This wants to be found, she said softly. Or someone wants it found through this. We didn't touch it with our hands. We netted it like fragile wildlife, eased it onto the boards, bagged it as tenderly as we bag a bird that lost its way into a classroom and broke itself against a window. The light softened. The lesser light blinked once and seemed to falter, like a candle convinced by a window's draft. Nora's hand went to the button in my pocket and tapped it. A rhythm, 2 and 1, an echo of what we'd seen. Half an hour later, Matson's truck growled up the 2-track. He stepped out, took in the marsh in one long glance, like it was a stranger at his table, and I saw the kind of tired a badge never admits to. You two don't know how to leave a day be, he said without heat. We showed him the plate. He swore in a church voice and called a tech who owed him a favor. While we waited, he stood with his hands deep in his jacket and watched the water as if it might confess on its own. Town split, he said, eyes on the dark. Half want a necktie party in the square. Half say they taught him to fish, and that ought to count for something. And the family, he stopped. We all know what the family wants. It's not mysterious. It's the most human thing there is. You see your light? he asked at last, almost not wanting the answer. Nora nodded once. It behaved, she said. Until it didn't. The tech arrived, tender with the plate, wrapped it, labeled it, and made promises about reagent baths and whispered numbers in the metal. When they left, the marsh drew us closer again, with that negative pressure you feel at funerals. The way the crowd leans toward the thing it came to deny. Nora took a step onto the bank, into the reeds that had been practicing stillness all day, and stopped dead. "Don't move," she said too calmly. I froze and felt it then. The boards under my boots weren't alone. Weight where there shouldn't be weight. Not heavy. Not light. The exact measure of a person who hasn't learned yet how to return. I looked down, expecting wet footprints that would bloom and vanish again, but there was only dry wood, forgetting it had just been water. The sensation passed like a thought that doesn't want to be caught having itself. Nora exhaled. "Something is rehearsing presence," she said. "It's new at it." We left offerings like sensible pagans, no sugar or coins or salt. Just what the place had already agreed to recognize. The button on the post for the night. Our two names spoken like promises to try again in daylight, and the patience to let the river keep time. On the way back to the truck, Nora said, "If the plate ties to a junkyard in the county, we'll have the last rat cook before it learned how to forget. If it ties to out of county, this gets political and then theological." I laughed because she wasn't wrong. Sleep came like a compromised treaty, honored for an hour, broken for 2. When it let go of me for good, dawn was a gray coin stuck between window and screen. I stood in the boathouse with my father's hammer in my hand, not as a weapon, but as an argument for work. The button was gone from the post where we'd left it. In its place, a circle of dry on damp wood, perfect as a stamp. The light hadn't returned, but something had practiced drawing its outline. Matson called it 9. "Plate's readable enough," he said. Scrub it a layer and got a sequence. Year sticker's wrong because it was peeled and reapplied. We're checking against a list of vehicles scrapped in 81. If this tracks, it points away from our guy's driveway and onto a back road toward an old yard out by the line. Means he didn't do his own disposal. Means maybe he had help. The coffee went cold in my hand. Help means accomplice. Accomplice means a living shadow. Nora came over with a map that had been loved into transparency at the folds. Back then, people trusted back roads to keep secrets. Yards did that too. The men who ran them traded in erasure. She tapped a square of map just off county line. Kessler's place. He died in 98. Son left in 02. Land sold 04. But the ground remembers better than the records. She met my eyes. "Your light has been pointing to labor, not magic." We drove out to the old yard, the kind of place that teaches children 2 truths at once. Every object is mortal, and everything becomes landscape if you give it time. Goldenrod shouldered up through chassis ribs. Oak saplings wrote their cursive into fenders. The air smelled like iron learning humility. We walked the rows like congregants at a graveyard with lousy headstones. Halfway down what used to be an aisle for a forklift, and is now a hymn to entropy, the map in Nora's hand stopped being useful and the marsh script took over. The light wasn't here, not as glow, but as intention. You get to recognize it, the slight forward tilt your body takes when a story is about to show you its thesis. Nora pointed with 2 fingers to a depression in the dirt, the size of a man's shame. "Here," she said, and even my breath agreed. We knelt. The topsoil was a careful liar, but 5 inches in, the lie tired. Cloth again thicker, canvas this time, the edge of a bag or a cover. Beneath it, the suggestion of a box. We cleaned like archivists. We uncovered a storage trunk, the color of old pay teacher whistles. Locked, but lock rot makes promises it can't keep. The lid lifted with a sigh that once had lungs. Inside, photographs curled into themselves. A pair of women's gloves balled small as fists, A broken compact with a mirror that refused to show the present, a key ring with nothing left to open, and folded into the corner, kept separate like a righteous thought, a strip of blouse with its last 2 buttons hanging on. One missing. The empty thread loops looked like mouths mid-word. Nora closed her eyes, as if counting to a number that would make her stronger. The photographs were not a horror show. That would have been easier. They were ordinary captured moments taken by someone who believed normalcy is a form of camouflage. Backyards, front steps, a tailgate with cups, faces making the mistake of thinking the camera is interested in them. In the corner of one frame, reflected in a truck's mirror, small, borrowing the image of an image, was the suspect's friend, the one people keep calling quiet, the one who moved away in '81 and never mailed a Christmas card again. It felt like the marsh had pointed, the river had underlined, and the trunk wrote the exclamation point. Nobody expected him, Nora said. That's how accomplices work. They rent their faces from the word neighbor. The gloves in my hand were smooth as testimony. One fingertip was worn through in a way that said somebody had worried at it during long drives. We called Matson. This time he didn't swear. He just said, "Stay," and the way he said it made the old yard feel like a place wolves might avoid. While we waited, Nora turned the compact over and found an engraving on the back barely there. Initials that matched the stitch we'd read by the river. The dead speak politely in towns like ours. They leave their names in places where only people who already respect them will look. The sheriff's unit turned dust bright and then let it settle again. Evidence bags, photographs of photographs, careful hands, the small decisions that keep a case from collapsing under the weight of its own luck. Matson looked at the mirror-glint accomplice and said a name that made the old yard feel colder. Alive. Out of state. A forwarding address. Pain ripples, but so does responsibility. That night, the light didn't come to the marsh so much as the marsh came to the house. Condensation on the kitchen window wrote 3 ovals where no hand had touched. The hammer tapped once, twice, then decided it had said enough. In the boathouse, the post where we'd left the button grew a lip of frost that traced a circle perfect as a wedding band. Nora, on speakerphone, said, "It's not haunting. It's choreography. It's teaching us when to be, where." I slept in the chair with the trunk smell still in my hair, metal and paper, in a patience that had finally lost its temper. Dreams came as postcards again. A willow rooting through a photograph, a license plate learning to breathe, a blouse walking away from a night it didn't agree to. Somewhere in the sequence, the arrested man sat down in a small chair and told a small truth to a camera that will never blink. Somewhere else, a phone rang in a city far from here, and a man decided whether to let it. Morning will bring the call to another department, and the phrase, "person of interest," said with the particular care of people who know exactly what they mean and refuse to say more. The marsh has done its part tonight. It has named the next page without telling us how to read it. And the light, whatever it is, whoever it once was, has made a promise. If we stand where it asks, it will keep pointing until this stops being a story and becomes a sentence. Matson didn't call it a break. He called it a direction. Directions are humbler. They don't promise destinations, only movement. The plate linked to a scrapped pickup moved through Kessler's yard in '81, cashed out as if a goodbye could be turned into cash by the pound. Title history put the truck in the suspect's orbit, then skittered sideways to his friend, the quiet one whose name had already made the old yard colder. Alive. Out of state. The word extradition floated between us like breath in winter air. Nora and I went back to the marsh, because that's where the truth keeps its rehearsal space. Daylight made the place honest and ugly. Cattails bent like bad grammar. Water the color of strong tea. The boathouse, a confession of nails and stubbornness. The lights don't like to be shown in daylight, but the pressure was there. that sense of a conversation paused mid-sentence. "It points," Nora said, "but it also edits." She looked toward the willow's mouth. "We're in revision." A city detective from out of county met us that afternoon, pressed coat, notes tidy enough to make the world pretend to be. He said the accomplice had built a second life in Indiana, then Ohio, then a town that thought anonymity was the same as forgiveness. "We've got a last known," he said. "We've got cooperation from their side." He didn't say hope out loud, but it stood on the porch and cleared its throat. At dusk, the marsh light returned without ceremony and put a white thumbprint on the water. The lesser light at the willow softer, paperback yellow held its place like a witness who doesn't care for crowds. Nora raised 2 fingers. "We brought your things back," she said, and we set the trunk's catalog on the bench in careful order. The gloves, the compact, copies of the photographs. The lights didn't brighten. They steadied, which is its own kind of agreement. There's a rhythm to these nights now. We arrive before the first cricket tells time. We wait. We name nothing we can't carry. The dock finds our weight and forgives it. On the 3rd pulse, the water rode a line toward the reeds. On the 4th, a wind that wasn't in the trees leaned into us. On the 5th, the boathouse answered with a single soft knock that made my father's hammer hum in sympathy, a tuning fork for the dead. That's when the photographs changed. Not physically, paper is stubborn, but in the way you see them when the place they belong to is looking back. The tailgate shot, cups in a row, faces practicing their friendliness. There in the truck's mirror, the accomplice again, not posed, just existing. And behind him, if you softened your eyes until meaning came through like morning through thin curtains, a streak of pale that matched the blouse we'd been piecing together one relic at a time. "People think hauntings are about punishment," Nora said. "Sometimes they're about editing, taking a narrative that was cut wrong and putting the scenes back in order." She pointed at the compact. She looked at herself before she left that night. That's what compacts are for, to believe your face is your own before you walk into a room. He took that. The river is putting it back. The lights held. The pressure eased, as if acknowledgement had counted as work. Matson called from his office, paper sounds in the background like a soft storm. "Ohio PD has eyes on him," he said. "He's older, thickened around the middle, walks like a man who forgot how to hurry. If this holds, we'll have him in a room by the weekend." He paused, then added, "Family asked a question I couldn't answer. How did it take this long if the answers were sitting in our water?" Neither of us tried to answer for him. Some questions belong to the air. That night, the marsh gave us sound instead of light. A low, deliberate scrape from the willow bank, like wood against stone. Then a plop, not a fish. A heavier syllable followed by a ripple that drew a perfect circle and refused to blur. Nora's hand found my sleeve. "Say it," she whispered. I didn't know which it she meant, so I said the girl's name the way a brother would, first and middle and last. The circle tightened, then released, then tightened again, as if practicing an oath. Later, at the kitchen table, the hammer resting like a sleeping dog, the compact's mirror offered me a face that looked like a man who'd been taught late in life how to listen. I opened it, closed it, opened it again, childish games, to test if the world repeats itself on command. In the glass, for a blink too honest to be a trick, the boathouse window behind me showed 3 small ovals of fog, the same number the marsh has been counting with. The mirror didn't hold them. It gave them back to the dark, which is maybe what good mirrors do. Morning brought bureaucracy, subpoenas, chain of custody signatures, the careful logistics of taking a past and making it admissible. It also brought a rumor with legs that the accomplice had a cousin who'd sworn as a young man he saw lights out by a yard fence the week after the murder, dancing like the end of a cigarette and pointing toward the road. Rumors don't go in reports, but they change how you stand in a doorway. While we waited for weekend, Nora and I did the thing that feels like superstition and is actually craft. We walked the riverbank in daylight to memorize its own magic, where the eddies pretend to be hands, where the reeds make a little theater of shadows, where a half-buried bumper wants to be a snake if you squint wrong. The more you know the tricks, the easier it is to spot the one that isn't a trick. Saturday afternoon, Matson sent a single text. Got him, not a flourish. Just a period at the end, like a man too seasoned to believe in exclamation points. They put him in interview 3, because 2 had become a room with a reputation. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He asked for water and then didn't drink it. The camera found a posture that said he was going to pick his words like nails out of a coffee can. He started with the history people in towns tell when they want to be forgiven. My father's belt. A baseball coach with temper and beer on his breath. The layoffs that made everything smaller. He built a scaffolding of injury and asked us to admire the engineering. Then Matson set the photographs down, one at a time, like communion, and waited. The man's eyes did what eyes do when they meet a past that didn't ask permission to be present. They watered. They narrowed. They sought corners without cameras. When he left her, Matson said later, he believed the place would do his work. Water and time are accomplices too, if you let them be. He misjudged both. Forensic techs matched the trunk's debris to scrap lists, the plate to an axle log, the glove's fibers to the blouse's thread. On paper, it looks like science, and it is, but beneath it beats the stubborn rhythm of a county that refused to stop looking. With the part of itself that isn't eyes, that evening, victory should have been clean. It wasn't. The main light appeared and held, but the lesser light by the willow flickered as if a draft had found it. Nora frowned in a way that adds years and takes none of her authority. There's a scene missing, she said. We've got the principal, we've got the accomplice, we've got the vehicle's last address. We don't have the place where her life was last wholly hers. She touched the dock rail with 2 fingers. She wants her sentence finished. The pressure changed the kind of shift you feel on an elevator when it hesitates between floors. The water breathed in along the dock and exhaled toward the reeds. For a long minute, nothing else announced itself. Then the boathouse door, shut tight, knocked twice from the inside. Not loud. Enough. The hammer trembled on its peg, then stilled. Nora nodded. We're not done, she said to the place, and to me. One more turn. The turn arrived the next morning, wrapped as an ordinary errand. I went to the hardware store for screws, and left with a story from the man at the paint shaker. Back in '80, a neighbor swore he'd seen a girl talking to someone at the gas station outside town, someone who wasn't either of our suspects. Army jacket, hair like it hadn't decided what decade to live in, he said. The kind of kid you don't notice until you take a wrong turn into a bad year. He went off to Vietnam, the man thought, or maybe he only wore the jacket because it was cheap and warm. Memory breeds maybes. Nora took the maybes to her map and did what historians do best. She made a timeline walk on 2 legs. The gas station sat on a vector that would have taken a driver past our river road if he wanted a shortcut and didn't want to be seen at the main light. A third man isn't a necessity, she said, but he is an idea the river has been hinting at. Lights in pairs, not one. Lead and witness. Or lead and look out. That evening, the marsh put on a new kind of show. 2 lights appeared where the main one usually holds court. Not a lead and a lesser, but twins, side by side, level as eyes across a table. They didn't pulse. They sustained. The willow mouth stayed dark. The dock boards cooled under my boots, as if a cloud had passed between me and the sun, though the sun was already gone. Nora's breath made small ghosts. Choose, she said softly. Left or right? I pointed right, because I am right-handed, and because superstition is just a way of telling yourself a story with fewer moving parts. The right light brightened. The left dimmed, then edged toward the willow as if assigned. The right drew a line that stopped short of the reeds, and held, like a sentence missing its verb. Third man, Nora said, and the hammer inside the boathouse tapped once in agreement. We stood there with our choice and let the marsh keep its silence. It had traded glow for grammar, and grammar is slower but fairer. Somewhere out past the county line, a man watched a door he hoped wouldn't open. Somewhere inside our station, a confession learned how to survive its speaker. And here, where the river rehearses memory until it's ready for a jury, the lights asked us, without threat and without mercy, to finish what we started. By Sunday night, the town had two moods. A part that sleeps because someone's in cuffs, and a part that sits up with the lights on because someone else isn't. Matson called from the station with the kind of fatigue that sands a man's words smooth. "Ohio will hold him for us until arraignment," he said. The interview gave more gaps than answers. He admits being there, then says he waited in the truck. The timeline sheds its skin every time we touch it. Nora and I carried the trunk items back to the boathouse, like parishioners bringing bread and an old book. The marsh was quiet in the way. Hospitals get quiet just before the nurse shift changes. Activity humming below a polite hush. The twin lights returned as if they'd been on a dimmer all day. Two white eyes looking level across the water, neither claiming authority. "Choose again?" Nora asked, not smiling. I lifted my hand. Right. The right-hand light brightened. The left slid toward the willow like a chess piece, obeying a rule we hadn't learned in time. We followed the right light's line, only a suggestion, brightness pretending to be thread until it pointed at a piece of riverbank that had always seemed like a shrug. Mud, a tumble of willow switch, a beer can from a season nobody misses. The pressure rose like a curtain, lifting. "There," Nora said, and her voice had the quiet of a doctor saying a name before good news or bad. We probed the shore. The soil surrendered a small metal object scabbed with rust. At first glance, trash. At second, a charm from a bracelet, the kind high schoolers trade like promises. A heart split down the middle with teeth meant to interlock with its missing half. On the back, an initial so faint you could mistake it for a scratch. The letter was hers. The other half belonged to a friend whose name wasn't in any report. Nora set the charm on her palm and held it toward the willow. The left light steadied in its new post like a sentry who's been given real work at last. "Witness," she murmured. "Or look out," the air cooled on my teeth. The boathouse knocked once and twice, then fell still, as if to say, "Yes, and now be careful." Matson met us with a frown that meant both good job and don't get used to it. He bagged the charm himself and phoned the lab with the compulsive hope of a man who's seen late miracles and mid-case collapses. "If we can place her at the river by time X," he said, "we can make the accomplice's alibi do what it doesn't want to do." He put a hand on the boathouse door like it was a shoulder. "You two keep letting the place do the pointing. I'll do the paperwork." The story the suspect told in interview 3 had the miserable elegance of a lie rehearsed over years. He'd taken her for a drive after a party. She was upset. He would never hurt her. He dropped her at the turnoff, and that was the last honest moment of his life. Then the load-bearing fiction. He waited in the truck while his friend talked sense into her. No force, no threat. Just men being helpful where the world had failed to be kind. I've seen houses built on worse ground, but not many that stood this long. What the marsh suggested next didn't make the papers. Some things don't know how to survive that kind of light. As we stood on the dock, the twin lights held steady, but a third, fainter glow stirred low at the waterline, like a coal remembering fire. It drifted toward the boathouse and pressed itself against the post where the button had been. A circle of brightness bloomed and stayed. "She's putting the scene back," Nora said. "The last place it belonged to her." I spoke to the glow as if it were a skittish animal. "We have your charm," I said. "We have the trunk. We have the plate. We have his friend." The glow didn't strengthen. It clarified. Shapes came into the light's patience. The edge of a blanket, the corner of a paper cup, a shoe print impressed and fossilized in boards they shouldn't be able to remember. Women's tread again, facing the water this time. Not running, looking. Gas station boy, Nora whispered. The jacket, the wrong decade hair, the third man. He was there before the river. He made the invitation. They made the plan. The idea fit too well to be comfortable. Plans don't form in a vacuum. They form where mercy is scarce and admiration for cruelty passes as manhood. The lights didn't applaud our deduction. They only held, asking us to hold too. Back at the station, a call came in from the next county over. An old cashier willing to say, finally, that she remembered a girl in a white blouse buying coffee the night everything went wrong, and the way a young man in an army jacket had paid with change and smiled without reaching his eyes. People remember what they can afford to, Nora said when I told her. Regret is expensive. Monday broke brittle and blue. The marsh traded its night grammar for daylight facts. Drift, stain, stubborn read. We combed the bank again. A plastic lid. A pull tab. The kind of artifacts that tell the truth with a shrug. In the mud under the willow, Nora found a set of scuff marks that matched a boot that wouldn't have been made after '82. The lab would do its cautious dance. The lights had given us a song. Now we needed sheet music the court could read. Matson's second call of the day had a frequency that made my bones want to answer faster. We got prints in the trunk, he said. Not clean, not full, but enough to show 2 men handled it. One is our guy. The other isn't in the system. He let the silence show us a mirror. We'll have to build him the old way. Names from places, pictures from yearbooks, handwriting from envelopes. The slow work. Unless your river speeds us up. That night, the twin lights split their duties without drama. The right one pointed us downriver, toward the bend where the current pretends to be a choice. The left kept station by the willow. The faint glow at the post returned and stayed, a patient third note under a chord. Nora said it out loud, so we wouldn't pretend later we hadn't known. 3 men, 2 arrests possible. 1 beyond reach. The beyond reach didn't have to mean dead. It could mean shape-shifted into a life that doesn't leave fingerprints, the kind that teaches Sunday school and never buys a second beer. We followed the right-hand lights line with a John boat and 2 paddles that remembered younger arms. The river road slid by like old film-faded houses, stubborn mailboxes. A swing set missing 1 leg. At the bend, the light didn't go ahead. It waited. It pressed itself flat, like a path marker on the underside of a thought. We beached the boat. The ground here was less riverbank and more stage. A flat seam of sand no one walks now because the trail moved when the county put in a new culvert in '94. Old ground keeps old promises. There, under a spill of leaves that had arranged themselves with a suspicious tidiness, we found the other half of the heart charm. Teeth met teeth with a soft click that felt like yes. The back held a second initial. Not the accomplices. A different name that tasted wrong in my mouth and right in the marshes. Gas station boy? Nora said again, and this time the dock back home knocked once across the water, a sound so faint it traveled as certainty rather than noise. We bagged it, tagged it, called it in, watched the river put its color back on, like a woman putting herself back together in a bathroom mirror after crying where the music was too loud. The right-hand light lifted, as if satisfied with our obedience, and moved first time we'd seen it travel with us rather than point from afar. It hovered above the waterline at knee height and led us home, an usher who knows you don't like to be watched walking down the aisle. On the dock, the 3 lights held their positions. Right above the water at the approach, steady at the willow like a sentinel, and on the boathouse post like a ring of breath on a window. The hammer was quiet. The compact's mirror showed only my face and the windows dark. The last place she was hers, Nora said, repeating herself because repetition is how we honor fragile truths. We need to say it in the report that way. We need to say it to the family that way. The family came the next evening, brave in a way bravery doesn't admit to being. Her sister touched the post with 2 fingers, then tucked the fingers into her coat like she'd borrowed a little light and didn't want to drop it. We told them the parts we could tell. We didn't tell them about choosing left or right or how the river writes its commas. They didn't ask for miracles. They asked for names said correctly and for a place to stand when the verdicts came. The willow didn't move. The lights didn't demand applause. The marsh had learned, with us, how to keep vigil without breaking the hour. By Tuesday, the town's voice had settled into 2 registers. The low murmur of people telling each other they always knew, and the higher pitch of those newly brave enough to say they never suspected a thing. Both sounded like self-defense. Matson's update was all verbs: hold, transport, arraign. The accomplice would ride a long loop back to us through paperwork and chain cuffs, time paid in miles. He's saying less now, Matson added. That's a choice. Nora spread her map on my kitchen table with the reverence of a deacon laying out communion. The charm halves sat between coffee rings, their teeth rejoined like a healed split. Third man stands where he can see both the willow and the bend, she said. He wants to watch, to be audience and editor. She tapped an old trail cut no one uses since the county straightened the road. Here, this is where he would stand to feel important. We returned to the dock at dusk with the ritual we've learned not to mock. The twin lights honored their marks, one above the water like a steady sentence, one by the willow like a footnote that turns out to be the whole point. Tonight, a 4th phenomenon joined the barest haze along the old trail line, a suggestion rather than a glow, like breath on a cold pane that doesn't quite become a shape. Spectator, Nora said, so softly the word didn't make ripples. The boathouse answered with a small, decisive knock. The hammer did not stir. The compact's mirror, left open on the workbench, reflected the window, and for a thin blink, the trail haze as if it had tried on being visible, and then folded itself back up. He watched, Nora said, not quite asking permission from the night. He watched and did nothing until doing something was convenient. The lights held. The haze did not deny it. We followed the trail line by headlamp, the beam carving clean grammar through cattail and regret. Halfway along, something metallic complained underfoot. A small flashlight, old, dead, the rubber ring around its lens cracked into a grin. The brand fit 1980. The battery inside had split and wept white crystals. On the knurled tail cap, 2 letters scratched deep by a pocket knife, not hers. Not the accomplice's. The 3rd initial and the first of his last name, the way boys mark territory when they don't yet know the word evidence. Back at the table, Nora cleaned the tail cap with the ritual slow of a person who has mourned right up against other people's proof. Matson bagged it and made the call to Ohio anyway. The third man's trail wasn't going to be a database gift. We're in the land of yearbooks and church directories, he said. Old coaches with good memories, gas station calendars, the kind of archive that lives in garages. He didn't ask about the lights. He knew better now than to ask a question the night prefers to answer its own way. The suspect in our cell slept like a man who learned early how to ignore rooms. The accomplice rode highways that had not been built when he last saw a river. And the third man, if he still breathed, stood, in my mind's eye, on the trail that used to mean something to boys who learned manhood from the wrong mouths. It's a particular breed. They like vantage points, not responsibilities. Toward midnight, the marsh staged its most deliberate lesson yet. The main light dimmed until the water was night again. The willow held its sentinel. The trail haze gathered itself into the smallest, palest hint of an oval, and then lifted, slow and stubborn, toward the boathouse roofline. It stopped above my father's hammer, hung there as if remembering its weight, and then, This is the part that will sound like exaggeration tapped 3 times on the rafters, without wood ever meeting wood. Air knocked. The room answered. What does air use when it wants to be heard? Nora asked, and because the question wasn't for me, I didn't answer. The trail haze drifted back to its mark, thinned, and was taken back into the dark like a thought reconsidered. I set the compact's mirror face down and immediately felt foolish, like I told a child to close its eyes during a thunderstorm. The mirror, patient, reflected wood instead of water, which is a kind of mercy. Morning delivered 2 ordinary graces. A neighbor brought a casserole without asking dumb questions, and the lab called with a maybe. The flashlight's tail cap had a whisper of oil and skin locked in the knurling, a residue that might yield what we needed if the gods of degraded DNA were in a good mood. We'll try, the text said, which is as hopeful as their grammar allows. Nora went visiting coaches, scout leaders, men who remembered boys who carried knives because a tool felt like a personality. She came back with a list of names and a noise in her throat that would have been a laugh on a better day. 2 of them wore that army jacket look because it was cheap and said something they wanted said about them, she reported. 1 moved to Florida in '81. 1 went into the service in '82 and wrote a letter home about lights in some other part of the country. The map of ghost lights is longer than ours. People take their myths with them when they leave. At dusk, the river did not perform. No main light. No Willow Sentinel. Just the old smell of iron and leaf rot in a sky the color of an unmade decision. We stood there anyway, because habit is a kind of reverence. 15 minutes in, a loon announced itself with a sound that can make a strong man feel his age. Then quiet. They've given us homework, Nora said. They'll wait to see if we learn. Learning looks like paperwork. We spent the next day cross-referencing charm initials against class photos, comparing ears and eyebrows, the way cops used to before 21st century shortcuts. Matson sent a deputy to a storage unit where a defunct gas station's records slept in boxes labeled with months that no longer exist. He returned with a receipt book fossilized in Greece. In November 1980, 3 coffees at 1:07 a.m., paid in change. The signature was a joke, a smiley face, all circles and lies. That night, the marsh rewarded the insult of our diligence. The main light came back, not bright, but sure. The willow held a softer shade, less sentinel and more hostess. The trail haze appeared and did not try to be anything else. Together they formed a triangle that a child could have drawn in the air with a sparkler. Positions, Nora said, and we took ours. Witness, worker, listener. The triangle didn't point. It waited. I understood then that direction is not always the service being offered. Sometimes the grace is to be held in a shape that refuses to collapse. We're here, I said to the night I have loved and feared since I was 12. We see you seeing us. The lights did not brighten. They steadied, the way a person does when someone finally pronounces their name correctly. Matson called from the station. Ohio signed the papers, he said. He's coming home. He didn't mean the man would find welcome here. He meant the logistics had agreed to move at human speed instead of legal speed for once. When he gets here, we ask about the 3rd man again, and we keep asking until his story learns how to sit up. The lights held the triangle. The hammer did not move. The compact lay open and offered only the room's dark. On my way back to the house, the dock boards under my feet felt warmer than the air could justify. I stopped and put my palm to the wood. Heat, not much, enough to make a claim. He watched, I said out loud, to the river, to myself, to whoever would have to testify. He watched and waited and wanted to be included. The triangle did not nod. It did not need to. Consent glowed around us, like breath you can see. Tomorrow we'll stand on courthouse steps with faces people will search for explanations in. We'll say the parts of the truth a courtroom recognizes and keep the rest in the drawer where you keep. Objects that remember when the world didn't. And when the lights ask again, with their old patience and new insistence, to choose left or right, we'll choose both, because the river has taught us that justice is not a road, but a confluence. They brought the accomplice back on a gray morning that looked like a photocopy of itself. All flat tones and no patience. The transport van parked where the camera couldn't pretend it was a hero. He stepped down heavier than the boy he'd been, eyes doing that quick math of doors and distance men do when they're out of practice with consequences. "Welcome home," Matson said, and the kindness in it wasn't kindness at all, it was accuracy. Interview rooms have personalities. 2 was a confessional. 3 was a desk where bad paperwork goes to get corrected. They put him in 3. He asked for coffee, held it like a prop, didn't drink. Matson let the silence do the opening statement. The man started in the key of nostalgia jobs that dried up, winters that were real winters, boys being boys on roads built for men. Then the photographs came out, then the trunk inventory, then the license plate, and the charm halves reunited like a door, finally getting both hinges. His voice kept its shape until the flashlight tail cap landed on the table. Then it bent. He didn't confess. He recalibrated. He said he waited in the truck and meant it harder this time, as if more sincerity could fix the physics of it. He said he tried to stop it, but the third boy man liked to make a point. He named the name in a whisper that sounded like a cough. The name fit our receipts and our yearbook ears too well to be wrong. Alive? Maybe. Gone? Perhaps. The word we all wanted was reachable. While they ran his new story against old roads, Nora and I went back to the river, because that's where the day's grammar gets decided. The marsh had reset itself to plain. Water brown as wheat tea, cattails listing like old men in church who know when to stand but don't agree why. No glow, no haze. Just that pressure that means you're on the right page, even if the sentence isn't printed yet. "They're waiting to see if we get it without the light show," Nora said. Graduation day. We walked the old trail to the spot where audience masqueraded as innocence. In daylight, it looked like any other patch of ground that once made boys feel tall. On my knees, I found what nighttime had hinted at. A coin sunk edgewise like a tiny grave marker. A 1979 quarter, silver dulled to regret. The kind of coin you'd spin while you waited to see what kind of man you were going to be that night. Not evidence for court, evidence for story. Some juries need both. Back at the dock, I felt the heat again rising through the boards in little oval pulses you could map with your palm. Not hot enough to be heat. Present enough to be claim. 3 ovals in a row, spaced like footsteps that choose not to leave a stain this time. "She's rehearsing arrival," Nora said. And I thought of the compact's mirror and the way faces practice being themselves before they meet the world. We waited without asking for more. The river likes patience better than hunger. The lab called mid-afternoon with a gift wrapped in caution. The tail cap's residue had coughed up a partial profile. Not enough to name a man by itself. Enough to put him in a room full of suspects and say, "Stand over there." Matson's shoulders lost half an inch of tension you wouldn't notice unless you were counting. "Find me a hairbrush," he said into the phone to a deputy already in his truck. An envelope. A stamp. "I'll take a miracle disguised as trash." The marsh took the evening to itself, like a mother who knows better than to watch her kids try hard. No main light. No willow sentinel. No trail haze practicing honesty. Nora and I sat on the dock and let dusk work as slowly as it wanted to. "Third man," she said eventually, was the kind who likes to set scenes and leave before the curtain rises. He wanted to see the moment right before. That's why the trail matters. Where men decide what they are and then pretend it wasn't a decision. Matson called close to midnight. "We have his mother's address from '96, he said. Forwarding expired. But the church still forwards newsletters. And somebody's still getting their Christmas card. The list of places where a man leaves pieces of himself, even while he's trying to be smoke, is longer than Shane thinks it is. Tomorrow we see if Ohio will knock gently or hard, he added, which is as close as the law gets to poetry on short notice. I slept an hour at a time and dreamt in pieces that didn't argue with each other. A willow root learning cursive in mud. A hammer tapping out a message in a code only fathers know. 2 lights like eyes. A third like breath. A coin spinning and never losing speed. When I woke for good, the compact lay open, and my face did not startle me like it used to when I thought this would never change. Aging has a sound. It's the room remembering each time you choose to stay. By noon, the deputy had a hairbrush in a bag and a story from a landlady who remembered a boy who smiled as if he'd borrowed the expression off a billboard. By 3, the lab said maybe again, but this time with punctuation. A likely match, conditional as all miracles are, to the partial on the tail cap. It won't sing solo in court, the tech warned. But in the choir you're building, it won't be flat. Evening brought weather. The kind of November wind that unbuttons coats and finds the inches of you thought were yours. We stood on the dock in hats that made us look like our parents and let the river say nothing almost long enough to break us. Then the lights arrived all at once. No slow reveal, no prologue. Main light above the water firm as a verdict. Willow sentinel golden as pages. Trail haze brighter than it had any right to be. And a 4th presence no glow. Just a pressure between us, close enough to raise the hair at the nape of my neck. Don't turn, Nora said. And because she knows where fear gets its starch, I didn't. The pressure didn't push. It accompanied. The main light drew a line toward the bend. The willow steadied. The trail haze pulsed once, twice, and then lifted into the shape of a hand, if a hand were a thought. Now, Nora breathed, and we both said the third man's name at the same time. Not like a curse, not like a prayer, but like a doorbell. The pressure exhaled. The main line sharpened. The willow light warmed. The trail haze lost its hand and became breath again. Acknowledged, Nora said, and the hammer in the boathouse answered with 3 polite taps. You can pretend that's wood shrinking in the cold. You can call it old house talk. Or you can let the part of you that was 12 and learned too soon about sirens admit that sometimes the world knocks back. Matsson's last call of the night came with a tired smile you can hear. We found him, he said. Not a door to kick, a door to ring. He works at a place with uniforms and name tags. He has a dog that loves him. He has a neighbor who thinks he's helpful. He will be very surprised to learn which story he is in. The extradition words were already sharpening their pencils. We would not sleep well. We didn't need to. Before bed, I set the reunited charm on the boathouse post, where the breath ring had formed those nights ago. For a moment, it looked like a small moon. Then it looked like itself, metal bitten by time, teeth joined, initials arguing less than they used to. The compact's mirror showed me not the lights, not the dock, not the willow, only my face and a bit of ceiling, which is probably what a man ought to see when the world has agreed to believe him this far. Tomorrow they'll put cuffs on a man who once spun a quarter on a trail and let it tell him what kind of person he was. Tomorrow the river will be the same color it is today, and the willow will still swallow sunlight as if it's a duty. And tomorrow night, if the lights come, if the pressure leans, if the hammer clears its throat, we will stand where we've been asked to stand and let the story finish the page it started before any of us knew we were in it. By the time the papers were signed and the routes plotted, the story had developed a public. People stood in small knots outside the courthouse, the way folks gather at theaters when word spreads that the show might start early. Some came for closure, others for company, a few because mystery is a civic hobby here. The air felt packed with breath held on purpose. Matsson gave the press sentences that could stand upright without crutches, forensic genealogy, corroborating physical items, multi-jurisdictional cooperation. He did not mention lights, trails, or a hammer that speaks and taps. He didn't have to. A town doesn't need every page read aloud to know its own book. The faces listening had that faraway set you see on people who are adding their private losses to the total. That night, the river changed the terms. No single main light, no neat sentinel by the willow. Instead, a band of pale along the waterline, like the ghost of a stage's footlights, the kind theaters leave burning so nobody falls into the orchestra pit of memory. The glow was thin, but even a promise more than a performance. Ghost light, Nora said, the word warming the dark without trying to explain it away. The band's edge brightened at the bend and at the willow, marking the two places where narrative had made demands on us. Between those points, the dock boards warmed in three ovals again, steady as breath during prayer. The message was kinder now, if insistence can be called kind. Finish, not for vengeance. For grammar. For the sentence that began in 1980 and has been missing its period for 45 winters. Matson's call came from a motel off the highway where justice naps between tasks. We ring his bell at 8, he said of the third man. No drama, no hero angles. We ask him if he remembers the willow, the bend, the trail. We ask him why the tail cap had his initials, why his quarter was buried like a bad wish. He paused long enough for me to hear the TV 2 rooms over. If he lies well, we still have enough. If he tells the truth badly, we have more. Nora and I carried our offerings to the boathouse. The reunited charm, copies of the photos, the compact open to the page that reflects without adding. We set the charm on the post ring, and for a heartbeat, it brightened like a small moon working on memory. We're not priests, Nora said, but ritual is how civilians keep from becoming ghosts themselves. The dock answered with a soft, contented groan the sound old wood makes when it chooses to hold. Morning took its time. The river wore a color best described as uncommitted. The willow kept its mouth shut. We drank coffee daring enough to count as a decision and watched the courthouse start its day. The accomplice came in shackled and left having signed a pact with the truth that he would immediately try to break. The suspect's lawyer rehearsed the word misremembered. A reporter asked a hard question and got a softer answer. Afternoon brought the knock in another state. The third man opened his door with the smile people wear when they think the census takers on the porch. He saw badges, then saw the old shape of the boy he'd been, then tried on the next 10 answers in the space of a blink. They invited him to the station in a voice that leaves room for consent without needing it. He nodded. Some people think cooperation will save them from chronology. While the miles did their quiet arithmetic, the marsh resumed its role as teacher. The band of light along the waterline returned, and then narrowed to a single bar that pointed straight at the boathouse door. Inside, the hammer trembled once and then stilled, as if warned not to speak over the witness. On the bench, the compact's mirror held a clean circle of brightness that came from nowhere we could name. It did not blind. It steadied. Nora said the girl's name first, full and careful. I said it second. The bar of light lifted from the water as if agreeing to be carried, and for a long minute the boathouse felt like a place where the living don't get to be in charge. Then the light did what only the kindest hauntings do. It went where our attention needed to be, to the post, to the charm, to the small, square ghost of a button that wasn't there anymore, because it had moved on to become story instead of object. Evening sent us back to town. Interview 2 took the third man, because 3 had become crowded with other men's alibis. He sat in a chair he didn't deserve and looked at a table that had ended better men than him. The tape rolled. His voice came out in a register reserved for men who want to be seen as reasonable. Matson said the names of the places like a prayer or a curse. The river doesn't differentiate. The man said, I was there, and for the first time the room exhaled. Confessions are never whole. He gave us the geometry he could live with. He watched. He warned. He walked. He said he tried to stop it. He said he shouted. He said he went home with a headache and a coin missing from his pocket. He didn't say her name. Matson did. And that's when the man's face changed, the way faces do when they realize a word will outlast them. He nodded once, small as a tick in a metronome, and said the name wrong, as if he'd never deserved to say it right. It will read clean later in papers. Charges, corroboration, community relieved. But that night, the town moved like an old animal when weather changes. People called each other and didn't always speak. Church basements opened their doors because coffee tastes better under fluorescent lights when you're talking about the past. Strangers stood a little closer under street lamps and pretended they'd been neighbors all along. At the marsh, the footlights went out one by one until only the smallest glow remained by the willow. Honey-colored and low, the hue of pages and late forgiveness. The dock boards were cool. The post was just wood. The hammer was only a tool. Relief is not noisy here. It's a house that stops clearing its throat. We stood a while anyway, because gratitude looks a lot like attention when you do it right. Tomorrow will be charges read, calendars set, adjectives chosen. The river will still be brown. The willow will still be greedy with sunlight. The compact will still offer the present back to whoever asks. But under it all, where the county keeps its true ledger, a sentence has moved toward its period, and the lights are stubborn, patient, unthreatening. Insistent lights have taught us what most courts forget, that a community is not an audience, but a witness, and the difference is what lets the living sleep. The arraignment was a tidy performance of messy years. Charges read like slow thunder, counsel nodding in the practiced rhythm of men who've sailed the sea before, the judge making the room honest by making it quiet. In the benches, faces that knew each other by grocery aisles, in church pews held still, and did math with their eyes 45 winters, plus all the ones that could have been different. Closure is a word for paperwork. What people really want is a sentence with a period they can believe in. Afterward, the family didn't make speeches. They stood on the courthouse steps and let the day rest against them. Her sister touched the necklace at her throat, the way a person finds north when the map is wrong. Reporters aimed questions like buckshot at a flock. Most fell into the civic grass and stayed there. A town knows when to speak and when to let the river answer for it. We drove out to the boathouse, because that's what we do when the air is full of second-hand breath. November had chosen a gray with dignity. The water wore its tea brown without apology. The willow's mouth chewed the bank in that slow, indifferent way that says time isn't a circle so much as a tide. No lights met us at first, no sentinel, no main, no trail haze pretending to be a hand. Just the dock, the post, the hammer that has learned to keep counsel. Nora stood with her hat in her pocket and her hair making announcements the wind didn't ask for. If it stays dark, she said, we don't take it personally. We set the reunited charm on the post one last time. Not an offering, not a bargain, just a thank you in metal. The compact lay open on the bench. Mirror, showing the plain face of the morning. Say it, Nora said without looking at me. I said her name, full and careful, then added a sentence the court won't record. You were here, and it was yours. The dock answered with a soft groan, old wood adjusting to a truth it had wanted to hold all along. A minute later, light arrived not as a point, but as a presence, thin as breath on glass, wide as a page. It rose from the waterline in a bar like the ghost of footlights, then thinned to the familiar single glow over the river, steady as a pulse at rest. A second glow woke at the willow's mouth, honey-colored and low, the soft of late forgiveness. No trail haze tonight. No hand asking us to finish the shape. The shape was finished. We were being asked only to witness it standing. Matson called from the office with facts shaped to carry, The third man booked. The accomplice charged. The principal held. Timelines braided with receipts and fibers, and the small stubbornness of objects that refused to forget what hands had done to them. He didn't say the word victory. He said the word continued, which is how grown-ups pronounce hope. Family wants the river, he added. They want to stand there without asking it for anything. We made space. People came the way they come to funerals and first games, and the unnameable afternoons in between. Quiet, coat collars up, bringing the kind of food that travels well through grief. The doc took on the patient burden of weight shared correctly. No one asked to see a light. The river obliged anyway, not showy, not stingy, just present, as if attendance were the miracle we're engineered for, and keep forgetting to call by its right name. Her sister laid a hand on the post where the breath ring had formed on other nights. I don't want to ask you for anything, she said, to no one and to someone. I just want to tell you we kept your name in our mouths like a seed, and it grew. The willow kept its honey shade. The main glow held. The compact's mirror offered back a small, clear circle that could have been a light or a patch of better day. The difference didn't matter. Both meant present. When the crowd thinned to only the people who had learned how to stay without forcing, the marsh did one last strange and decent thing. The glow above the water lifted and drifted not toward us, but along the old line that had once been a trail and was now a lesson. No hand this time, no choosing left or right, just a gentle procession, a light taking a walk down a page it had finished writing, to a margin where it could rest. The willow dimmed to page color. Curtain, Nora whispered, but she didn't mean ending. She meant intermission. The weeks after looked like ordinary life trying on its clothes again. The papers ran headlines that pronounced things closed, and then stories that suggested nothing closes in a place where the river is a verb. Court gates set and moved. Lawyers warmed up their favorite adjectives. Matson slept in something closer to nights than naps. The trunk from the yard entered evidence with all the humility a metal box can muster. The flashlight tail cap taught a jury that boys grow into men who ought to answer for the marks they leave on the world. Sometimes, at dusk, I'd stand on the dock and get nothing more than the honest dark. Sometimes the main glow would hold for half a minute, like a candle deciding whether to attend. Once, on the first real snow, the boathouse knocked the way houses do when their bones learn winter again. None of it felt like a performance anymore. It felt like a practice you keep, because it trains a part of you that courts don't measure. The family asked if we would keep one thing, not as evidence, but as anchor. The compact lives on the workbench now, closed more often than not because we are afraid of reflection, but because the present doesn't need to be checked as often when it knows it belongs. The charm halves stayed with the sister. The clasp clicks like a small, good machine doing its job. The hammer's weight is the same as it was when my father hung it there. Sometimes a tool is a prayer that's learned how to be useful. On the first spring day that didn't lie, Nora and I took the John boat down to the bend and back. The river had traded its tea brown for something like forgiveness you can't quite drink. We didn't see the glow. We didn't need to. A sandbar announced itself where there hadn't been one, and the willow had dropped a limb that wrote a new line on the bank. Places keep editing themselves, even when the story has found its grammar. People ask, gently, if the lights solved the case. The answer is no, and more than no. Science did its civic work. Men and women did their patient jobs. Objects kept their small faith. Records remembered what we taught them to. The lights did something else. They taught us posture, where to stand, when to say a name, how to witness without auditioning for audience. If that sounds like superstition, try living without it when the sirens have gone quiet and the night is louder than you expected. Now and then, when rain has worn the edge off the day and the house smells like wood that's remembered rivers, I set the compact open on the bench and let it hold the room. The mirror shows a man older than he thinks he is, and younger than he feared. A dock that knows how to bear weight, a window that learned to be a page. If a glow finds its way into that circle, it doesn't stay long. It doesn't need to. We know the sentence. We know the period. And we know that after a good ending, a town doesn't go dark. It burns low and steady, like a stage light left on, so nobody falls while they're finding their way out.